think it works. Hello, everyone. Good to have you here. I'm here with Jan and myself to present to you from A to B, which is about ingesting the ALab assets, the demo assets, into AYON. And let's see how we get there.
Hi. So we will start, if the clicker works, with a little just an intro of who we are. Just an asset artist for the last 17 years, so don't expect anything super technical from me. That's why Roy is here. Just feel free to jump in to correct me if I'm wrong in terminology. And
he's going to make it technical.
So he's going to make it technical. I'm going to make it a little artistic, and we're going to both try to make it funny. Because there were a lot of USD talks already, but ours is going to be the most fun, right?
Yeah. I mean, the dancing part is really good.
So, yeah, let's just kick it off. Who works with the USD, by the way, in here? Cool. Who is confidential working with that? Like, confident, not confidential. Okay. Right, so I guess most of you already got the joke, right? At least laugh a bit during the process. Yeah. Cool. Success, right?
Yeah, I mean.
So we will start with just explaining what the USD is to those who didn't work with USD. I see some laugh. Yeah, that's good. So USD started in Pixar quite ages ago, I would say. And it's a universal description of a scene. It's something we all dreamed about, I think, for ages. There were promises, never happened. There is another promise, hopefully it's going to happen, finally. As Pixar made it open source in 2016, which is also ages ago. And we still are not using it fully to its full potential, so it's going to take some time. But also in 2023, Alliance for OpenUSD, is it the shortcut? Was established by Pixar, but also by Apple and NVIDIA. So the companies who are not involved that much in the entertainment or animation or whatever industry, they are jumping in because they found that USD can be used for something else than just producing films. NVIDIA is teaching in their Omniverse, which is built on USD, they are teaching robots how to build cars. So there is way more just beyond the entertainment and the creative industry usage. And it's because it's spreading everywhere, I think we should somehow deal with it, even with the small businesses and the big ones. So this is a great list which ChatGPT put together. What are the promises, but what's the reality of those promises? You can read it yourself, but I can rely to this one. I don't know if you do, but the most of it is, I would say all of it is true. The promises are big. The reality is way more complicated, as usual, I would say. Right? With USD comes a lot of terminology. This is just a glossary from the documentation, and if you want to use USD, you should know what these are. It's a lot to learn, but if you just don't want to go through the documentation, there is a great talk from this guy from last year. Just keep in mind that something already changed.
It's actually the funnier talk, so.
Yeah, it's also funny talk. But some of it already changed, which is like just a proof that it's still evolving. So just to sum it up, USD is a big studio pipeline power available to everyone, but it's super hard to drive it because you have a framework, but you don't have necessary tools to use it. You have to build those tools yourself. Like DCC companies are trying to make it way more accessible, but it's still not there yet. So it could be quite the opposite. It could be harder to use it compared to Alembics or whatever workflow you are used to use. because it's all nesting stuff together, and it's also hard to manage without those tools. So that's why we have AYON and similar to help us to manage that, to keep it on a leash, basically, to hide everything from the artists, because that's what we want, right? We don't want to care about what's under there. So we picked up ALab as a project we can test everything on. ALab is a project from Animalogic. They made it open source as part of digital PEC library, as digital
example library.
That one, which contains multiple projects which you can take, tests. There are a bunch of licenses you need to follow for sure, but it's a great benchmark of how it's ideally it should be done. It's well structured. The ALab itself is based on the little clip they made. I guess 3 minutes. It's not even 3 minutes. It's less than a minute, maybe. Just a few shots. It's a quite complex environment. There is a character, 2 characters. There's a lighting. There is FX simulation, and you can also get the edit. But with the ALab, the USD project itself, there is just the environment and lights and 1 shot. You have cameras for all the shots, but 1 shot is with the caches and the animation, etc. So for us, it was an ideal ground to play with and to try what we can do with the ALab and AYON. It's also a great example how USD should be handled, because it's following most of the USD guidelines. Most of them were actually built on top of the ALab. So if you kind of want to know what's going into payload, you have to learn what payload is. Then it's a great way to actually get into those files and check what's happening. You can get it in multiple iterations. The simplest one is on GitHub repo, which has like 250 megabytes, and it's just the structure. Then you can just download the models and textures, etc., and it grows up to, I guess, 100 gigabytes or something like that. So for us, it was a great way to test it. So the goal was to take the ALab as is and just publish that. What it means is we wanted to have the assets separate and the little bits here and there with the reviewables. We wanted just to have a project inside, which is kind of unusual to ingest the entire thing. It rarely happens. The real-world connection could be that you just get the assets from someone, get a layout from a vendor, and you just build on top of that. This one is a finished project, so it's kind of a slightly different. It could be that some other studio work on a series 1 and you are working on a series 2 and just get everything. But it's still, we wanted to try where we're gonna get with everything. So what would be the outcome? This was kind of a test of USD integration in AYON, just to cross-check it, what files it's creating inside of AYON, what files are present in the ALab project. If it's kind of in sync, what we can change, what we should change, catch the issues, of course, and develop further, just plan what we can develop and how we can improve the workflows, and also just get into the artist-facing tools. Like if we gonna make them and prep them, or we gonna keep it open for studios to build, there is always a balance to if you're gonna provide the tools and kind of dictate how you should do it, or you're gonna make the tools yourself. And also one more thing, which usually comes at the end, right? So you have to wait for that. So let's dive into the asset itself, the project itself. It's way more complex than just the USD. Where is the? I have a pointer somewhere here, right? It doesn't work on a TV. Oh, I'll just point. So it's not just the USD in a project. That was when I first opened it, because they introduced more terminology into that. Compared to other studios where I used to work, they use entities and fragments. The color coding here corresponds with the colors. So entities are like a high level, if you would imagine that's the asset which contains everything, like let's say USD asset. Not just USD asset, that's the unfortunate thing, which points into fragment, which is usually like a geo or a look or a shot or a camera, which again points back into entity. So they are intertwining all the time together, and they are living in a separate folders. So it's not like you have the asset and everything lives underneath. It's not just here is the asset one, just here is the geo, here is the look, bundle it together and return it, and I'm gonna use it somewhere else, and it just intertwines. So that took a while to figure out. But the structure itself, it's kind of a standard thing. So this is a entire composition arc of the USD. This is a shot itself with the shot overrides as layers. And then it composes with the whatever. I always need to check entities, which are coming into fragment, right? Which just pointing to the camera, pointing to the, this is what they call breakdown, pointing to the camera, which belongs to the shot, set, which belongs to the shot, character, etc., etc. So it gets pretty complex, and we needed to find a way how to start with the easiest thing, which is an asset. So we went to the beginning, and I basically started to rebuild everything. And we are all in it, so we like the stats. It's 333 assets. That means that entities, I think. Hope so. 22 assemblies, which is assembly of few assets together, and also assemblies within assemblies and instancers. Yeah, there is a lot happening, and it's just one environment, you know. So and it's 4,500 USDs, which, comparing to the traditional way of working, you will have one alembic for character with one maybe HDA Houdini for shading, and that's it. In this case, it doesn't apply. So it's a lot of files to go through, and that's why you basically need something to manage it. It's I would say impossible for at least this scale to manage it by hand. So the approach was to try to do it manual first, just figure out whatever we can do. So to recreate the assets was the simplest one, but we very soon realized that we need to keep the hierarchy, because on the overrides and the layers on top, they are pointing to those assets and creating overrides. So we cannot just change the hierarchy, just rename. Even the rename geo to geometry just cannot happen. Can, but it will cause more issues, etc. And we wanted to do it the right way. We didn't want to go to USDA file and just search and replace, which is a possibility, of course, but that's not the correct way to do it. Maybe easier, but we tried to do it correctly. But we also wanted to simplify it a little bit, because it was obvious from those files that they are doing tons of automation on top of that. And also we wanted to find a way, and needed to find a way, how that everything applies to AYON itself, to find where it lacks the capabilities, how it publishes the files. So we kind of shuffled around bits and bobs of the USD integration, which kind of evolved to match what they do, and you can also customize it. And yeah, at the end it was a success. I published my first post-it note. That was the simplest asset, like literally just, yeah, thank you, 4 polygons, I think. took me a month. But it was working. So I basically got from this one, that's the original asset composition. It contains 12 USDs. One asset is 12 USD. That one 4 polygon post-it note is 12 USDs. So it starts with the, I will point, it starts with the entity, which is the orange one, and that's the asset. And that's pointing to sublayers, which is a model. In that case, yeah, that's a model, look, and the one on the bottom with multiple files over there is a draw mod. That's when you switch the viewport to the bounding box, and it can just, it's a render from multiple angles, so it represents the object without loading the geometry. Then it goes to geometry, that's the large purple box, and all those bits, they are variants. You have to take a look into the glossary. There are variants, sets, blah, blah, blah. There is a render geo, USD, which is the main render. Then there is a proxy, and there are tons of other ones, which are based on their talks, and it's not in the documentation, but based on their presentations. Like 99% of them are generated automatically, either in Houdini or Maya. And these are like a deformation, sim, cloth deformation, etc. They have tons of these. And then there is a layer on top which points to material and textures. There are 3 materials on every asset, one for render, one for proxy, and one for, it's hard to explain. If you switch a viewport to a rendered geo without rendering it, you want to see a texture, but it doesn't support UDIMs, so it's baked into one UDIM. Took me a while to figure out what the hell that texture is. Once you figure out, it's very easy to set up, but also it's easy to automate it, right? So that's why for them, when you are a modeler, just press a button and it creates everything for you. And that's basically what the artists want. I don't want to deal with what the payload is or what the draw modes are. It's just like, there you go, I published, just make it for me. This is how it looks in AYON. It's similar, but simpler. So we have top-level USD asset and 2 layers for look and model. And I also added those draw cards because it looks cool in the viewport. And it works. So first one was, that's the second one. So I tried the more complicated one than a post-it note. But you see the AYON loader, so works. And also, all this was built with the automation in mind. So all of those tests I did, I was planning that it should be a template. So I'll throw it into Roy, and it's gonna push through AYON itself. That was our goal, basically. I have to thank to Mustafa, the pipe dev at Input, who actually cleaned up my mess. So it wasn't that bad. But he cleaned up most of the Python scripts and the AYON scripts. He did quite a lot of on the AYON side, which I just didn't understand. So just examples. This is one of the simpler assets. This is a model, so that's fairly easy to ingest. This is a render geo. It's a slightly more complicated model, which could be assembly, but it's not. Maybe that was too complicated, but it's somewhere in the background. I think it's never presented in a film. So this one was fairly easy. Then there is a look, as I said, that was slightly more complicated with recreating those multi-materials. Also, I wanted to point out that their shaders are baked. All the textures are collapsed because they use Glimpse, their own renderer. So everything was collapsed. And I will talk about one issue later. But also, we needed to switch between 2 sets of material libraries. And that's also explained later. 10 minutes, great. I'm just trying to figure out what that means.
The first template we made is for model ingesting. It already has variables built in, which are used for the automation, which Roy will talk about later. basically leveraging the context options in Solaris, and they are built into every template we have. The model ingesting is fairly simple. In the model subnet, we have a subcreate which looks into the original ALab project itself and pulls out the geometry, strips some attributes, and then using USD guidelines and the ALab, which are basically following the USD guidelines, setting the USD as it should be. So setting a path, default primitive purposes, proxy and render, etc., etc. And we end up with the model. You can see the proxy with the vertex color already built in. And if I swap to final render view, you can see it swapped to a high-res model. Then we have a ROP which publishes the model into AYON. This is a second template for publishing the lookdev. It also uses the context options, as we mentioned before. Right now, we are importing already the AYON USD asset, because when we publish the model, it also publishes the USD asset, which contains a layer of the model, and now we want to create a layer of the lookdev on top. If it's already in there and we want to reauthor the lookdev, we need to nude the lookdev. Right now it's not used because this is a first publish. Everything is happening in the materials and bindings. If you look inside and look inside the material library, there are two material libraries. I will explain why later. Let's just jump in. Every asset in ALab is using three materials. Proxy preview, that's a USD surface preview for the viewport representation. Then preview material is when you display the render geometry in the viewport. You want to see a texture which is baked to one UDIM, and then you have a render. The lookdev was baked down into the texture, so that's why it's simplified like this. And why we have two libraries, it's because of opacity maps. We didn't want to put an expression in the materials because some assets have opacity and some do not. And we didn't want to put a switch inside of the material. We put a switch instead, switching entire library. For example, this one has the opacity on the little watch over here. Luckily enough, there is a parameter set by Animalogic on the model itself, which says, hey, there is opacity used, so we can easily define it in the switch. The rest is fairly simple, just defining the default prims, assigning materials, and also draw mode cards, which you can override the draw mode in the viewport. That's basically a render from top, bottom, and sides, which then represent on a bounding box or a cross. We also made a setup for rendering turntables to have some reviewable inside AYON. Basically, it pulls the model, it pulls in the look, it creates a spin, it adds an environment light, it has an auto-framing camera, so you don't have to change the camera, it automatically adjusts the camera distance and angle based on the asset size, so we can render entire garage or just a little paperclip. And it loads some reference objects and setting the karma render. If we look at the result at the end, it looks like this. And then we have the publishes, which publish the look, updates the USD asset with a new layer, and creates a turntable render.
So this was a pre-recording. That's why I'm not doing the live demos, because this took me like 45 minutes to record. And I still forgot to mention why we are swapping the opacity. It's because those assets which don't have any transmission or opacity don't have the opacity map, and these were breaking the automation. So we just swap it based on the parameter. Assemblies are a completely different story. Because they are, as I mentioned, they are nested into each other. They have the instances inside, so we needed to approach them slightly differently. We needed to analyze what's inside, what's not, how much we're gonna break from the other one. But the template kind of worked pretty well at the end, so this is just a quick overview of
Another template we made is for assemblies, and now it gets a little bit more complicated. The start is simple. Once again, loading the original USD from the ALab using the context options again to set everything. And now there are a few Python scripts. The first one is for listing all the components present in a scene. This one doesn't have any except for itself because it has just an instancer and it's instancing a lot of prototypes across this motherboard. On this one, we don't really need this. We will need it for later and bigger assemblies. In this one, we are listing all the instancer prototypes. You see it found the instancer and it's listing all the assets we're gonna need to load from AYON later on, because these were published previously and we have just in case prototype count. We have two ways to go through this and replace them. It's a loop, but we found there is a better way and give us a way more control, which actually allows us to just press a button to load prototypes in this case, because we don't have any assets. As I said, it's just a point instancer. So we hit a load nodes. You see that it preloaded a subnet with the AYON loaders. So all of these little bits are now coming from AYON. So if we take a look on any prototype metadata over here before we actually loaded the AYON, you see it's coming from fragment, look, surfacing, blah, 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 blah. That's the original ALab. But if you look after the loading from AYON, you see that it's leading to P project Logic. That's the AYON project folder. Then we have this subnet that's for manually loading later on if there are nested assemblies inside of assemblies, which could be done automatically later, but right now it's manual. And then as previously, we just have the turntable render, which fires up automatically with the publishing. That means we just replaced all the little prototypes in the point instancer with AYON assets, and we are ready to publish. Right now, I can show you that the template is really versatile. So if I just roll back and delete all the prototypes from here and replace the context options with something way more complicated, that's probably the biggest assembly, which is not a set, which is a set piece. So just let it load. So this one is straight from ALab files. If I take a look in the get components, you see that there is 438 components. There are a bunch of instance ones, vegetation, etc., which is a little plant, I think, hiding in this jar. But let's not run it right now because that's a little bit slow. But I can load the assets, just hitting load nodes. You see it's running. It takes not a lot of time, I would say, considering that there is 400 of those in a scene. And there we go. It took less than a minute and it's not running from SSD. I have the project on the normal hard drive. So right now, if you take a look at any asset in here, you'll see that it's leading to P drive, which is my AYON project. And as before, it's gonna render if we select the review node at the end, except for those prototypes, which I will not run right now because it's slightly slower to find them, but it renders and it's AYON.
Yay. Yeah, so that was my part done, basically. I delivered those assets, those templates to Roy and Mustafa to actually make it happen and push it into AYON automatically.
Interesting. Oh, cool. That's me. Shall I sit down?
See? Just on a minute.
Yeah, just means I need to be super quick. Whoa, switcheroo. Thank you. And as Jan said, he would be doing the simple stuff and I would be doing the technical stuff. Two people raised in confidence that they knew how USD worked. You've probably are all lost right now. It's going to get fun, I think. So what are we going to talk about? We're going to talk about automating this stuff. Jan did all the heavy lifting. All we need to do now is be lazy, sit back, and do nothing. We're just going to do whatever he did, but then 100 times. What will we do and how will we do it? Take his stuff, take it through a pipeline, anything that can run it in sequence a few times. So we need to find all the ALab assets in some way automatically, run his logic, and publish each asset, which is actually also already in his template. Then how are we going to do that? We're going to create very small minimal building blocks that will do each of those small steps, which is actually very easy to do with AI. If you're not technical, because again, AI is very good at doing very stupid, simple stuff, which is what we're trying to build. And then we're going to automate it, and we're basically making a node graph of putting all these steps behind each other, and it's like playing with Lego, I hope. So, first step is finding all assets. Luckily, they had this whole weird fragment stuff and other stuff that was a flat list of folders of all the stuff they got. So we just took all those directory names and said, these will be our assets. And we excluded a few because there were some fragments that weren't actually assets. So yeah, as Jan already hinted before, sometimes you need to be somewhat consider that not everything everyone does is always consistent, so there will always be some outliers. So in this case, we just added a filter. In this case, we're using Houdini PDG, but it could technically be any node graph that can run just some few simple steps. In Houdini PDG, you have a node. It's called a file pattern, and you just provide it a folder and say, in this folder, give me all the file names or the directories. And that's what we basically use to generate our asset list. We could have used a CSV file, an Excel sheet, whatever you want, but this was just us being lazy. The nice thing about PDG, and if you're doing something like this and building small blocks, or building blocks, is to test it quickly and as often as possible, because even if you know what you're doing, you're probably doing it wrong the first time. So it's always good to just run it and see, does it actually get the folder and the asset name that we want? So on the right-hand side here, we're seeing a few of those runs where it found, for example, an asset name called electronics turntable 1, which seemed reliable. And then we would just do the exact same thing and use the asset list and just make one simple building block that's just a call to the AYON API that says create folder, which is an asset in AYON. And so we did that. When we ran it, the API doesn't allow me to recreate it again if it already exists, so I needed to add a check to make sure it doesn't exist already. We also made sure that it would make the tasks, because we weren't really sure how to identify what tasks they were using, because we just got their flat exported files. We just assumed each asset would have a modeling task and a lookdev task, and I just pointed it to Jan's beautiful templates. And there you go. These are his templates. I guess he explained everything. I'm going to go through very quickly and see how easy this is. So yeah, I did that. As soon as we create assets in AYON, it doesn't create folders on disk. Usually it just does that as soon as you launch a task. And in this case, what we were actually trying to do is convert the ALab assets, not just to ingest, here's a bulk of assets, and here you have it in your database to load it. What we actually wanted to do is convert the ALab assets into something that if I wanted to change the asset, as if I would have gotten it from a vendor, an outside vendor, and I might need to change the model, or I might need to change the look, I wanted that to be ready. So what we did is we actually batch ingested for every asset a work file for modeling and for look, so that if we needed to do a change, we technically could. Technically, batch ingesting is even easier if you do not need that, because you just need to do the conversion once and publish the asset and disregard any work files whatsoever. But in our case, we just created the work files or the work directories, which is, again, an API call away in AYON. We copied the conversion templates, which is just a file copy, open the template, and then we just set the AYON context options, which we see on the bottom right, which are just some customizations in the Houdini work file. So in this case, I'm here explaining the technical stuff, but maybe my hidden objective all this time was actually have Jan figure out how USD works on his own and see if an artist could actually figure it out. And also see how far he could by doing the actual conversions, the creative stuff, and how little technical knowledge he would actually need to have to make a template that we could actually batch ingest, and that worked actually pretty well. And at some point we just said, okay, can we use context options for the reusable bit so that I just need to touch those inputs and do not even need to learn how your template works. I'm just going to check the assets in the outputs, and these are the inputs, so that he has the creative control, and I'm mostly looking at it, how can I batch this workflow? So, like I said, you could technically skip this if all you're really needing to do is getting the published files on your server. And then all that's left is running the system, which would basically run the PDG network through all the work files. And then here's a very simple version where everything is already published into AYON. Each asset will have a turntable rendered. And I'll talk a bit more about that. But the nice thing about batch ingesting is that you don't need to worry about this kind of stuff where someone needs to change anything, because all we're really doing is doing an automation. And we can rerun it again. So let's see. We're running the factory. What were we running? We had the 333 assets before, which somehow slimmed down by the 7 assets that actually weren't assets, or somehow were very oddly structured in their structure. So we kind of avoided those for now. For every asset, we made a lookdev kit, or we had a lookdev kit in Houdini that would automatically generate a turntable and render that. The ingestion process included doing those renders. So each of those published assets would have a turntable rendered with the converter shaders to confirm they were actually working. So we were running this on one machine, again, thanks to Mustafa. He was kind enough to just turn it on at some point on his machine. And it just took under 3 hours on his single machine, which seemed fine to do actual 10-frame turntables per asset in Karma, and doing all the conversions as well, and the ALab or the AYON ingestion. But with Terrace applied, that would probably be 100% extra, so that's 6 hours. I mean, still seems reasonable. So let's see how these assets looked when we load them into AYON. For those who don't know, we can basically browse the assets. This is all the assets generated. We can kind of filter. We can set statuses. So let's see. I think they have some decor. Let me try that out. Yep, that works. And we can browse the tasks. Technically, I could assign them, but because it was all Jan's work, I couldn't care. And we can track the statuses here. And if I click one of the look devs, for example, I can just press spacebar, see the reviewable, and then start complaining about Jan's work, which was actually animal logic, I think. Was it logic? See? This is me with a mouse drawing a circle as I'm sitting on the bed here at FMX in my hotel. Yeah, mouse don't work very well on bed sheets. There you go. That all works. Was there anything else? No. And in this case, this is in the desktop app. Don't mind my background. These are all the assets, and I'm here just trying to open one of the work files to see what if I needed to do an actual change to, for example, the model. So the models in this case is, again, me being lazy, his template, but I can go into the sub level and do whatever I want. So I could add a mountain modifier because I like distorted books. Do I? Let's see. Yeah, I do like this. Okay. And I can publish it, but in this case I didn't because we have automated everything already. And if we would continue this down to the assemblies, which I could show, but then we're getting technical again. But this is one of the converted assets, and what's very nice to see here is that as soon as we're opening these as work files again, we actually have a fully managed work file inside AYON as if I've made this assembly. So I can even use AYON's tools like the scene inventory to start swapping out assets, removing them, updating them, and everything like that. So as soon as these work files are prepared, I can technically start continuing the production as if I was making this. Something to be aware of is that we were using these templates and these work file templates to make work files as if we just got the outputs from another vendor, which often happens, and also because the ALab project doesn't come with work files for their assets. It just comes with the USD structure and USD data, so that's what we're working with. But it's a perfect example, like if you would work, you can do the exact same thing with an asset library, megascans, kit bash, stuff like that. You don't have the work files that generated their assets, but you do have the files, and you can prepare them for your pipeline to make them very easy to continue working with. So, if Chuck Norris steps on Lego, the Lego cries. But if he uses USD, who's going to cry? And that's about the positivity. Do you want to actually swap?
No, let's just keep our place.
Okay, very good. Let's see.
So there were a bunch of issues we encountered, and I would divide them into ALab/USD issues and the AYON issues and improvements or whatever. So the USD kind of held up for whatever it was supposed to do. We had a bunch of failed assets, and it was just about 5, which from those 300 was pretty impressive. And it was usually simply because of a missing texture or a misspelled name somewhere. So all those templates worked pretty well. And the only issue we realized later on when we tried to render that is that their flattening of the textures wasn't, I wouldn't say correct, but depends on their shaders, especially with the PBR, because some of the textures had black albedos for metals. So that's why some of those renders look strange, just because the PBR is wrong on those, probably because of their glimpse shader, etc. So I wouldn't say 100% that we can render the ALab correctly without touching those, but here comes the work file, so we can just dive in and fix it in the shader, disconnect the albedo for that little bit, replace it, etc. That's why those work files are pretty useful to have. Definitely for assemblies where some manual work is usually needed because they sometimes break. And also we needed to think about how much we want to break from the original data, because the essential idea of the USD is it's non-destructive, so you never delete anything. With the published assets, we just broke from the original because we republished geometries, we republished the looks. With the assemblies, you are taking already assembled USD and just replacing the references, but that layer which came into the systems is still there, and in theory should still be there. We can break it, but do we really want to do that? Just because, let's say you are working with a vendor and they made a layout for you, but if they change something, you also want to change yours. So there is more of a theoretical question where we want to break it. We didn't right now on the assembly level, so we are building on top of that. But so far, we didn't have many issues. We didn't get into shots yet and the caches, but we will eventually. The AYON issues wasn't issues, it was improvements. There are a few more, which Roy will talk about.
So we introduced the USD workflow, at least. We shipped something last year that was like, here's some building blocks to build your own pipeline in AYON, and here's the tools you need to make it like relatively easy for TDs to do their own stuff on top. But they were all in the essence like what we call like USD products. So we like untyped in any way, and AYON doesn't really identify it as, is this actually a model or a look? To AYON, it was just all USDs. And it felt a bit weird working with this large data set that there were actual models and looks, and we wanted to make it easy to identify the two instead of everything being a USD file and just starting to be confusing. So we turned into having model and look products that in the end can also have their own validations in the AYON system. But it was basically a minor change to support that. AYON really has a system where you can have reviewables for anything, which is like a separate review product. But it also makes much more sense to include the turntables and all those renders with the models and the looks. So we made a system that makes it very easy that even though you can completely configure those separately, you can have them automatically merged and actually be part of the same published product. So a model can actually have the reviewable directly through the publishing system integrated, even though the user can configure it completely separately, which is just a way of giving a lot of control to studios to customize it, but still make things end up at the place where you actually want it to end up. And there were some USD resolver hiccups that we faced. Again, I think in an earlier talk, Milan mentioned that there's an AYON USD resolver. It has all the features that you really want, like pinning and caching and everything, but it just needs a lot of production testing. I think a few years back we got contacted a few times, or at least Input got contacted a few times, but hey, we want to use the resolver. Everyone really wanted it tomorrow, but actually when it was there, everyone was like, yeah, it's still quite complex to use USD. So the actual usage is still relatively limited in production. But the thing we faced here when we were actually doing the whole rebuilding here with the resolver was that there was some internal caching issue only in Houdini for whatever reason, where if you would layer mute using the Houdini system, that for whatever reason, some files might not layer mute, which was due to how we cached something, and Houdini didn't really agree with that. So we changed the caching around and ended up actually improving it, so that's even better. But sorry to disappoint. I know Jan told me I was going to do the complex stuff, but in essence, the actual ingestion is really that easy. It was hardly anything complex. Jan was actually able to figure out most of the USD bits on his own. Also because he's a very good asset guy, he also knows how to handle these assets, so that helps. But it kind of goes to show that, like with tools like Houdini, we haven't covered Maya in this case at all. It's actually quite easy to take a template and put it into something else, especially if, for example, AYON already offers some ways of like how we recommend to do it. So you kind of are guided doing it that way. Whereas USD with OpenUSD is like an open standard. It has, you mentioned that the animal or the ALab project is based on guidelines. Those aren't actual guidelines. No one said this is what we're all agreeing on how you should do production. It just happens to be that those guys say this is how it works for us. And there's definitely some guidelines like, hey, heavy geometry, put it behind the payload, which is just a way of, I can technically disable this inside USD to defer the loading of it, to make things faster. But that's just like a sensible choice. It doesn't need to be that way. So maybe it's less collapsing buildings and everything is actually going to be fine in the end. What's next? Can we be even lazier? Not me, but maybe. So how about batch converting asset libraries? Megascans, KitBash, of course, they will also start shipping their own USD data, but maybe there's some older libraries, or maybe you have your own internal libraries. PDG is actually a very good system to do very dumb building blocks and actually run them procedurally and see if that works. Similarly, we can run things through Huyanun, Meshi, or Triple AI to generate generate just assets for you, and you can directly have them completely prepared, as you can see, into usable work files to continue your production. So you could have even like from your asset list automatically generate all the assets on the first go, and you're ready to go off, as if those were your like reference assets or the initial versions of your assets. Or if you prefer that to work in another way, you can also have like a watched folder where as soon as someone drops in a USD file, it automatically gets ingested into your pipeline, generating work files for your artists, as long as we can all just be lazy. So then that was the one more thing.
The ultimate goal of everything was to make it available for everyone, which that's Milan's call, when it's gonna happen. That is eventually, right? So far we have all the assets in, we have all the assemblies in, but we don't have shots, cameras, etc. yet. So it's gonna be available for everyone. The only thing I think you will still need to download the original ALab, because as I said, we won't break the dependency 100%. But it's gonna be the biggest, I think, project to play with in AYON. You can test all the production features, etc. So eventually it's gonna end up as a sample project, a big sample project.
Or you can turn it into the simple project.
Yeah.
This was relatively lightweight, right? So that would be very cool. I think if there's anyone here that has batch ingesting data or other data of their own that they want to try this on, I'll be happy to be your stupid AI partner and see if I can actually help you out with doing this.
Because saying that all the work files are going to be there, so you can basically reuse whatever we created.
Yep. The automation templates, those will also be provided. And of course, you can run it on your own machine and see if you're faster than Mustafa's machine. So this is just the first sample project. Like I said, what we're really doing is providing these very simple building blocks. Say, let me just try this on my own folders. What does it do? Can it actually generate the files for me? But again, the actual templates that you generated ended up actually being relatively trivial and also artist-driven. So you could just take one of your own asset libraries or one of your own files, make that template, and run a similar system on your own files and have it completely ready for ION. Or if you're working with your own pipeline, do something similar. It's the actual automation isn't the hard part, as you might have seen. It's ready to use in open source, so that hopefully everyone can use their own pipeline, because that's kind of what ION and Input is all about, is that we want to provide tools that make creative teams accessible for all sizes, and have everyone deserve a robust pipeline. So there's no excuse, get ION. There is still excuses to not use these, so I skipped that slide. And hopefully no one has any questions.
Thank you very much. I did pass around the mic, but I don't have one. And I don't think we have one because of the 2 mics here. So
If you speak loud enough, I'll try and repeat the question in Dutch.
Thanks for the talk. It's really great. So I'm quite deep into USD. I don't know much about AYON yet. Does AYON, so it seems you have an asset hierarchy workflow in place. Do you also support a full shot-based department layering, assembly publishing, and also within assets and assemblies department layers, not only modeling and shading, but also arbitrary departments like CFX, cloth, whatever. Does AYON provide all that, or is it right now?
Yeah. So the question is kind of, well, what kind of asset structure does ION come out with out of the box, and how customizable is that? I think that's kind of the core of the question.
Yeah, and not only limited to assets, but also assemblies and shots. So
yeah, and assemblies and shots. Yeah. So basically, what we shipped last year was just like you could just publish any USD from any of the known DCCs that had USD outputs. And then we had some Python API code that basically would layer like what we call the contribution workflow. As soon as you publish a product, it was able to go into the shot or into the assets in whatever place you would like. So you could, for example, say I'm publishing geometry, some model from Maya, and I want to contribute this to my asset in the model department. And that's how stupid the system really was. Is we just like, okay, from anywhere you can contribute anything to an asset, and it would just automatically add the layers for you. And the nice thing about that, as was also seen here, it's quite trivial to customize it to your own needs. And the types of layers you could add it to, that's just a list in settings. So if you had more layers on your end, you just have more things to target to, and including the layer order. Yeah, and what we've done is we're somehow embedding, like on the settings, what the ordering strength roughly should be, and they're defaulting to, for example, 50, 100, like 150. So if you need to add layers in between, you have like a range of 50 integers or 49 integers to add some more layers in between. That's how simple the system really was. With assemblies, again, it was mostly that the way we intended it originally was that you would contribute it just to an asset that would just have an assembly stage, so that it would behave exactly like a regular asset. You just also did assembly there, which also allowed you to put lights in there and do any of the other asset effects that you might be doing for other stuff. So far, I haven't really seen the need that we needed a completely separate like asset type template specific to assembly or assemblies. But yeah, again, it's relatively simple but very customizable.
Well, assembly doesn't have a payload, so it's.
In our case, I think the system will generate the payload regardless. Yeah, I think it might still generate it, but.
And for shots?
For shots, it's a similar system. It won't generate payloads, but it's a slightly different structure. But it basically generates separate layers into department layers, and you can still contribute different references into each department layer. The only caveat there is that the system, the way it's built now, is that if you say would have different effects tasks that will each be generating a separate effects product, those would end up, for example, in the effects layer. Those different products, those would not be ordered. Those would just be references in a random order inside the effects department layer. So what you would do is if you have like character effects and other effects that are like need a very specific order that the one is after the other, you would add an extra department layer. that is ordered after the other effects layer. But yeah.
Truly hope you don't need 50 layers between the building layers. No. You
No.
Another selling point USD is always variance and variance sets. Did you skip them or does ALab not have any?
ALab, like the USD contribution workflows works in such a way that as soon as I contribute something, I'm allowed to tell it, is this a variant or is this just like a regular reference that I'm going to add as a sublayer or something like that? So if you enable variants, then in the publishing section, you just have attributes like what is the variant name for this one, which defaults to the product name that you're now publishing. So if I say have myasine that happens to have 5 separate variants, you can completely author them completely separately. You don't need to merge them yourself. The whole system was designed to behave quite similar to old workflows and also be able to convert old workflows to publish into USD structures. And each of those products would then just turn into a variant in the model department layer. Again, it's a relatively stupid, simple system, but that's also kind of why it works to customize it. The way AYON does work, it's using Publish or Publish for publishing, and you can always remove a plugin and add a new plugin to completely customize how the actual publishing logic works. But out of the box, so far I've seen quite a few different use cases of people using AYON with USD, with very complex layouts and assemblies, using Houdini Component Builder that's already doing variants, which can still fit within the AYON USD structure, which might seem odd, but it does totally work fine. And you can actually, for anything you publish, you can completely disable the contribution workflow, for example, even per asset or per product, so that you could also just say, what I'm publishing now is completely controlled by myself. Say I'm using the Houdini Component Builder, the Component Builder, and it's a full USD asset structure out of the box. It can publish that, and in Houdini, for example, it can also detect the explicit layer save paths, which are the layers that Houdini will write out additionally to the one save path that is set in the ROP. And it will then still generate separate products of those, so those can be versioned and tracked separately in AYON.
And just to add to that, ALab doesn't have variant. It has a variant set called vargeo, where they actually store the high res and deformation, etc. That's the only one they have. Luckily enough.
Any other questions? Can I ask some questions? Oh, it's more questions.
Between analysis and templates and automation, how much time did you have to put into the whole project?
Well, that's hard to judge. For me, it was more about understanding the USD, how it should be done, and how should I make it. But as you saw, that the template is fairly easy. At the end, it was huge, and it shrunk and shrunk and shrunk to the bare bones. So the AYON part took less, just fixing issues, but it could be done very fast if you know what's going on inside those files. So.
I mean, we worked on this over the span of a few months, but I think I might have just spent maybe less than 3 days on this in total.
Yeah.
On my own time. So for me, it was just here and there. He would be saying, "Hey, I'm trying this," and then I'll just look into what he's doing. I was really going at it from a pipeline TDF. If I was in the studio, here's a pipeline. He kind of knew how AYON works, not the USD workflow, and not saying that is the best way to work together. But there was a positive about me trying to let him deal with it. And I told him at the very beginning, anything you face or you are confused about, let me know, because anyone else using the AYON product that have never used it before will probably face the same things. So that's kind of how I went about it. And he just reached out to me a few times, and I fixed some stuff. I think I spent about 3 days.
For me, it was more of a research to dive into, see how it works. And a lot of scripts. I made the basic scripts, how to get that folder structure, how to create that folder structure in AYON in the beginning, and then they polished it out. So for me, it was just doing the pipe TD just a tiny bit. Most of it was ChatGPT, just figuring out the stuff, which was working really great. Without actually understanding the USD and Solaris, I was able to make an auto-framing camera just with like a few lines chatting with ChatGPT, and it just worked. Like right now, you can just plug in any primitive and it just gonna frame it correctly. So that's also quite a help for us artists not needing pipe TDs or learning that's because that's not a task what pipe TD should do, right? So it makes it more accessible. So it's hard to judge how long would it take, but if you template it once and you have a pretty decent standards in the studio, then it just runs forever.
Yeah, another question?
You mentioned the component builder, which enforces a specific primitive hierarchy, which follows the ASWF guidelines. Do you also have kind of a default primitive hierarchy structure enforcing by AYON, or is that like up to the user doing it?
Currently, the only enforcement we really have is the fact that I think by default it expects the top group name to have the asset name. I think that's like the fact that something is called geo underneath or not, technically is not enforced. Since now we've changed it to have model and look products, which means we can basically target, like if it's a model, it needs to go there. We can add extra validations. Those validations are like, again, publishing plugins, so the validation happens on publish. But for look, for example, we have some validations that are optional. You can disable them in the settings. But for example, in a look publish from Houdini, there is a validation, I think it might be enabled by default, that says this publish should only contribute anything that's a share assignment or can be considered like part of a look. So for example, if you generate in your look somehow and you're contributing geometry, it will tell you, yeah, I'm not sure if this is what you want to do, because that usually hints at someone somehow removing a layer break or accidentally adding a cube. And I think by default, for example, those also excludes lights. So, but there might be use cases where a look for an asset may have lights. So I think currently what's possible is you can completely disable the validation in your production, so it will never be validated. The other option is you can make it optional, so that if an artist knows he wants to override it during publishing, he can disable it, which will remain disabled in that work file, so that the next time you open it, you don't need to toggle it again. And the other option, I think, for this particular case, we have a setting as well that checks which contributions or which prims types it disallows. So you can actually change in settings, okay, we will allow lights, but not geometry. So that's also customizable without changing the code. Cool. So just to reverse the roles here, Q&A, you got your hands. Let's rehearse, like see if you guys actually watch attention. What is USD? No, just kidding. Did everyone actually follow along? Is there some part where you were like, oh, this is way over my head? Way over your head. Yeah. Where am I now? Anyway, I guess it's time for beers.
Thank you very much,
Go.
everyone. Make sure to come to the talks in the afternoon. There are some less technical ones from studios, including AYON, and
that's
trying to fit it to artists and hide it much away from it as possible. And at the end of the day, I think 6:15 or something like that, we're going to be presenting the results of the pipeline survey that we collected at the end of last year and the year before. So we have results of, I think, around 300 studios that answered. And we're going to go through it, talk about it a little bit, and then make it publicly available to everyone to see. And yeah, if you haven't participated in the pipeline survey, why are you here next year? Look for it. It's going to be in December again, and we're going to. Now we have your contacts. That's why we scanned you. We will spam you with a pipeline survey at the end of the year.
It's only twice a day.